Welcome back, viewers. If you're just joining us, this is Breakfast Daily, and now it's time for us to get into our self-development segment. Remember that the 16th of July, which was Sunday, was World PR Day. And of course, if you've been following us, you know that we've been sharing some PR tips throughout this week, and that's because it was World PR Day. So today we're going to be talking about harnessing the power of public relations, and in the studio we have with us Mr. Noel Nuchugang, big man, a public relations lecturer at Ghana Institute of Journalism, UNIMAC, and via Zoom we also have Mr. Gilbert Manirakiza joining us, and he's the founder and chief executive officer of the New Mark Company Group. All right, welcome to the studio. Welcome to Breakfast Daily too.
Thank you.
All right, so let's get right into it. What is PR and how is it essential to us in this fast-paced world?
Right. So good morning to your viewers. This feels like home. I've been a regular panelist on Citi TV in the very early days, and so it feels like coming back home.
Yeah, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. Right, so when you talk about public relations, you're talking about the strategic relationship that entities build with their stakeholders. And so coming from the principle that no man is an island, no entity, no organization is an island, definitely you have relationship with a host of stakeholders, people who have a certain level of stake in your organization. Yeah. It is important to build, it is important to nurture, it is important to sustain the kind of relationship you have with these people, knowing that they are because you are, and you are because they are.
Right.
And so when you talk about public relations, you're talking about building these strategic relationships with all of these stakeholders. In fact, when you look at from a more layman's perspective, we say PR is someone who speaks on behalf of an organization.
Yes.
But that is definitely not what public relations is. It is just a very minute aspect of what we do as PR people, to the extent that you can be a public relations practitioner throughout your entire practice and you may never be heard speaking. You may never be heard speaking at all.
So you can just be at the background.
Exactly. Yeah. Draw a lot of strategies, even prepare people to interface with the media folks and speak, and you may never speak at all. And so public relations goes way beyond speaking, but it is a very strategic function in every organization. And the idea is to build, relationship with all of these stakeholders.
Yeah. Oftentimes we think of PR and we're thinking of branding. Is there a relationship between the two? And if they are different, how different are they?
Right. So definitely branding is traditionally a function of marketing. And I am one of the few scholars whose scholarship cut across public relations and marketing. And so I'm able to speak to this. So yes, definitely you're talking about a lot of elements that come together to form a brand. You're talking about the heritage of the organization. You're talking about elements like your logos, your colors, and what you stand for, what message you have, and all of that. Now, where public relations comes in terms of branding, is to help communicate the reputation of the brand to all of these stakeholders. And so what public relations uses chiefly is communication. And so when the brand is built, people must know about the brand. People must know the story of the brand. So we use a lot of storytelling through media relations and stakeholder engagement to get all of these stakeholders to understand what the brand stands for and what the brand offerings are. So that is where public relations comes in. But when you talk about building the brand itself, it is chiefly a function of marketing.
Right. All right, so we're going to engage Gilbert. Gilbert?
Hello, yes. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you.
All right, Gilbert. So Gilbert, obviously, I'm sure you can hear us. Right now, I just want to ask, how do you create a good personal PR?
Thank you. I just want to also join my colleague Noel to say how delighted I am to be here this morning. It's a great show, and I hope, like Noel, I'll be a repeat guest on your show because it's such a fantastic show. And What we're talking about this morning, just to segue into your question, is extremely critical because we actually live in a very noisy world. I think you all agree that every single day we are bombarded by millions of pieces of information, and at a personal level, probably hundreds into thousands for some of us. And when you look at that, it's very difficult to do what Noel was describing just now, which is to engage various stakeholders, create relationships, not just at organizational level, but also at personal level. And that's why practitioners like ourselves in the PR field have actually to step up and help organizations and individuals to get themselves out there, to get themselves known. And the Newmark Group, which is a 13-year-old Pan-African strategic communications agency, has really been doing that for large multinational companies, African brands, individuals in some cases. And really the essence here is to help them to do exactly what we are talking about this morning, which is to build strategic relationships. And when you talk about strategic relationships, coming back to your question, it just doesn't happen at organizational level. It can also happen at personal level. And in fact, you can say that every single individual is called upon to become a personal PR practitioner, personal PR agent. And that is because we communicate every single day, every single moment of our lives, and we use different tools and channels to do this, to communicate with either the people around us, in our jobs and at home and so forth. Now, how can we actually get this right? And I think you said that we're going to be talking about things that help people grow personally, and I think that personal PR is probably the most important investment that anyone can make. Why is that? It is because the relationships in our lives are the ones that shape us. The relationships with our employers, the relationships with our employees, for those who are employers, the relationships with the lecturers, the colleagues we work with. So how do we get to do this well? The first step is going to be having a very clear intent, a very clear objective, at a personal level. For example, you can say, in my career, I want to, in the next 5 years, for example, I want to climb up to being the chief executive officer in my company. That intent allows you, first of all, to have a North Star, which is very important in strategic communications and relationship building. The second thing is you have to define your personal brand. Coming back to your previous question, whereby Noel very well answered it, that branding is about creating that unique identity that everyone will know you for. What do you want to be known for? And once you define your identity, it's then very important to actually craft a compelling story. Many of us actually don't realize that we do this whenever we write our CVs, whenever we go for interviews. People will ask us, so tell us about yourself. The answer you give to that is actually your personal story. The only thing is we think it's just for TV interviews and not something we should use every day. We have to be very intentional about the stories and the identities we tell about ourselves. And after that, then you have to map what we call your stakeholder ecosystem. You have to ask yourself, for me to get to be promoted, who do I need to build a relationship with? Then you set about communicating your values, your competitive advantage, your worth to these various ecosystem stakeholders, I would say, because it's only when you activate these relationships that you are going to be able to achieve your objectives. Now, there are a couple of critical attributes that everyone should really invest in. The first attribute is trust. You cannot build sustainable and beneficial relationships without fostering trust. And people won't trust you if they don't understand you. And also people won't trust you if you're not relevant to them. So trust is very important, reliability is very important, and you can only achieve this by being intentional, and this is one of the critical roles of PR. I'll stop there because there is quite a lot to unpack on personal PR, but I think you get the gist of how it can be done at a personal level, which is the same thing pretty much at an organizational level.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much for that. Let me just come, because you're in the academic space, right? And so are the universities doing enough to create that kind of skill level or talent pool, to serve organizations?
The industry.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that this question is a given, knowing that I'm an academic. But I'll say we have been up to a lot lately. You know, for a very long time now, the Ghana Institute of Journalism has dominated this space for training public relations, you know, communication professionals. In fact, it is the first and foremost, you know, institute in the whole of Sub-Saharan Africa that had been doing this for a very long time now. And so you hardly would go into any communication or media industry in Ghana today, talk about public relations, and not find someone who is trained from you know, from the Ghana Institute of Journalism. Talk about some of the best PR brains we have in Ghana, in Africa, a whole of you know, a host of other places, and you would find the Ghana Institute of Journalism products there, you know. And so I think that the universities have been up to a lot. There is a certain trend which I personally have a problem with, where, you know, we are beginning to drift into hardcore academia rather than practice, you know, because you find a whole lot of these regulatory organizations come with, you know, rules on what papers, publications you should have as an academic, how you should get your PhD. And so they chase you into a lot of hardcore academic, you know, roles rather than focusing on the industry practice. But we still find a way of blending, you know, the two. I've been consulting for a number of brands, you know, on the side while I do my academic stuff as well. And so we still find a blend to give the students some very practical lessons, you know, so that when they go out there, they don't struggle. So yes, the universities have been up to a lot in that regard.
Right, okay, so still talking about the universities being up to a lot. Do you think the whole, you know, course of PR in the universities are only tailored for certain industries? I'm saying certain industries because I find myself in the creative space. And in the creative space, you know that it has been, we are talking of selling Ghanaian music out there, but you can see that there's a very, there's a whole disparity of PR when it comes to music here in Ghana. There are a few people doing it. They're not a lot. And you can see there's a need for it. And when it comes to fashion, I can only name one person in Ghana here right now that is doing PR for fashion. So I don't know. Do you think the schools are only are only focused on one industry, or are teaching them, okay, you know, you can actually be a PR for sports, for the president, for this, and not just one way?
Right.
Yeah.
So public relations traditionally has been dominated in the hardcore commerce, you know, sector, where people are selling, there's a product to sell. And when it comes to the services, you know, like issues of entertainment and all of that, not much of public relations is practiced there. Now, I would say one of the difficulties is that, yes, of course, when the universities teach, they teach you public relations, general public relations. Usually at the undergraduate level, it is general, you know, once you climb up, you begin to specialize. And our expectations are that from the training we give, our expectations are that you can just move into any sector and flourish. So then the issue becomes interest in these sectors. Now, there's also another big problem. A lot of the people who find themselves around these entertainers and all of that think that they can do public relations.
That's the problem.
You know, they are not professionals, and they think that they can do PR. Then again, the entertainers themselves, looking at how, you know, the entertainment industry, the sports and entertainment industry is a huge industry. We're talking about investments. They're buying players, for example, about 50 million Ghana's, you know, 50 million pounds and so on, 100 million pounds and so on. So you can imagine the quantum of investment that's going into such an industry. You need people to protect reputations. You are talking about very egoistic reputations, because these, you know, celebrities have a lot of ego to manage, and you need people to do that. But when it comes to our part of the world, not many of these celebrities understand that, look, a portion of our investment should go into hiring professionals to do our work for us. And they find themselves in a lot of troubles. They go for interviews, for example, like you. I mean, a journalist will grill you. They have questions they want to ask. You need someone to prepare you, someone who has media consciousness to prepare you for such interviews. But because they are not hiring the services of professionals, they go and all the time they cause problems for themselves, and a lot of them go into extinction. We've seen a lot of celebrities pop up 1 or 2 days and then they go into extinction. So yes, I think that It's an ongoing conversation to develop a lot of interest in these areas, but obviously the entertainers themselves should also be hiring the services of professionals like us.
Right.
Oftentimes, and Gilbert, you can also take a stab at this, but oftentimes I think that we look at Africa and we always saying that, listen, we haven't finished dealing with our bread and butter
Our
issues.
problems, yeah.
You know, how can we, be talking the more fanciful things, because it's like, oh, PR is extra. Let's deal with our, the hardcore bread and butter issues. How important is PR to African economies?
Okay, so before Gilbert takes a bite on that, I am not surprised at that. I mean, having been researching in the field for some time now, I'm not surprised at the thinking of a lot of people. We always think of public relations as an afterthought, and it is not peculiar to PR. A lot of the organizations think of PR, law, even sometimes HR, some of these functions, we think, it's an afterthought, until they find themselves in a big problem. Then they come chasing the public relations persons. Every organization is prone to crisis, for example. If you find yourself in a crisis situation, your pre-existing relationships become very crucial for you to survive on that particular crisis, right? But who was there to build a relationship before the crisis came? You had no one, and so you're going to be in a big problem.
You're going to be alone.
And so if you think of it as a strategic contribution to the overall outcome of the organization, then you should be hiring a lot of people to protect, because it is cheaper in the long run. It is cheaper to prevent that from happening than to say, let's let it happen and then we'll kill. And so it is a big problem.
Gilbert.
I totally agree. I totally agree with the sentiments in the room. Because indeed, one of the biggest challenges we have in Africa, generally speaking, and I speak from experience, we cover, in our agency, we cover over 30 African countries. We've been around for 13 years. We've worked with some of the largest companies, both from Africa and abroad. And one of the things we've realized is that particularly for governments, there is a lack of awareness of just how strategic public relations and strategic communications generally is. They think that, like you said, this is something you do just to embellish, things that you're already doing, but they don't realize that every single strategic objective that they have depends on the relationships that they have with various stakeholders. I'll give you an example. All our countries, I'm sure if you go to any website of any president's office in Ghana or anywhere else, we'll talk about attracting investors. Guess what? Investor sentiment is a very real thing. And how do you get favorable investor sentiment? By building a very compelling story, by telling the positive things that you're doing. But we are seeing consistently a situation whereby both governments and private African private sector players are doing fantastic things. They're introducing reforms, adopting great policies, but no one really knows about this. And we know that for the case of government, nation branding requires that you actually promote the symbolic actions or the tangible actions that you are implementing on the ground. So we're seeing a massive problem, or maybe even if it's not a problem per se, we are seeing an underperformance in some areas by many African economies simply because they haven't embraced the storytelling aspect of what they do. And that's very critical. And when you look at the private sector, it's not necessarily any better. We find large companies that are doing great things, that are having a lot of impact on the ground, not really telling their story. And if they did, and if they managed stakeholders properly, they could actually accelerate their own growth. So this is a peculiar problem. There is an improvement, I have to admit, that we are seeing more companies, more governments coming to us to request for our advice, for our guidance, but there is a long way to go.
So before we wrap this up, how does Africa brand itself?
So that's a very good question. I think when it comes to place branding or nation branding, there are a couple of very, very critical principles that you have to think about. The first one is obviously developing a very clear intent. If you hear the name France, they have as many problems as we have in Africa, but there is a certain perception that comes to your mind. If you hear Switzerland, if you hear Germany, there's always a certain perception that comes to your mind when you hear those names. And it's not that they are better or they are very accurate in those areas. For example, if you hear Germany, you hear precision in engineering. Is it because everything they do is perfect? Is it that your Mercedes-Benz is going to last for 100 years? Obviously not. It's simply because they are intentional about how they build their reputation. So Africa has to start with a deliberate intent of what we want to be known for. And that's the starting point. It should happen at country level, but also it should happen at continental level. And the next step would then be to engage professionals like ourselves, because these are not things anyone can just wake up and do. You need to have gone to Noel's classroom for you to get it right. So stepping up the training and also working with professionals like ourselves would be the next big step. The third one is to measure, make sure that we are keeping in track with how the brand is doing, generally speaking, not just as Africa, but also as individual countries. I have to admit that for Africa as a whole, it's going to be slightly challenging to get one brand process or one PR process going forward. But I think organizations like the African Union, the African Development Bank, the AFCFTA Secretariat could actually come together and start leading that charge. And obviously working with professionals like ourselves, it shouldn't be a big challenge.
Okay, so
I have a quick contribution to that. You see,
Yeah.
so nation branding is chiefly about storytelling, but there should be a story to tell. Now let's take the African continent as an organization. The citizenry will now be the employees. Employees, let me say, are sometimes even better ambassadors than what the official conversation of the organization is. Because what you say in your social
General
circles,
discourse and all
your
that,
discourses, your social media handles and all of that, what you say can, be a lot more compelling story than what the official, organization is even saying. Now, the citizenry of Africa, what is the story we are selling? So branding is about your identity, how you stand out from other brands. But there should be a story about the brand. What story am I going to say? So I think that the governments have a lot more to do, to whip up the interest in the citizen.
For us to tell better stories,
Exactly.
better experiences.
Exactly.
So we came up with this idea of Brand Ghana. I don't know what happened to it, but I think like what you're saying, there has to be a communication to the people, the citizenry, to say this is who we are, this is who we are aspiring to be, and this is how we want to live our lives, so that we're all in sync and saying that we're moving in this direction. But I think that a lot of that space has been left open, wide open, and it's like everyone should figure themselves
just
out.
do what you want
And
to do.
communication is both verbal and non-verbal. The feelings we have. This morning, I was listening to your radio station.
Okay.
That's my regular.
Bernard and the team.
And they were talking about my road, the Tema and Abokobi road.
Okay.
That's a very terrible road. I drive on that road every now and then. And the kind of experiences I have on that road, what story am I going to tell? So I think that there are fundamental problems about the kind of story we are going to tell. Otherwise, we could actually be using our social media handles to tell very compelling stories about our destinations and so on.
Okay, so before I let you go, there is no such thing as bad publicity or bad PR. What do you think of that notion? That is something a lot of people say.
It's a huge fiasco.
Misnomer.
There's no such thing as bad publicity.
Yes.
It's a huge fiasco.
Really?
No one should say this to you. I tell you what. So you see, when there is publicity, people build a certain perception about you. They build a certain you are known for something, so that becomes your reputation. The question is the reputation a positive reputation or a negative reputation? People say, yeah, I did this and I got a lot of following on social media. What is the reason for the following? So we look at the quantity and not the quality. What is the quality of the following? That is why you can have a following of about 2,000 people. And have a strong bond, a strong relationship, command a lot of respect, have a community where you command a lot of respect, than someone who has about 1 million followers. People might have been following you because they want to see the next negative thing you are going to do, and they'll never position you in any positive light. There are certain things, I know if you are an employer, for example, and employing some of our celebrities, there are some of them you wouldn't want to work with, but they have following. Why wouldn't you want to work with them? It is the kind of reputation you have about them. So publicity is just not publicity. I think that we must concentrate on positive publicity, publicity that gives positive impact to our societies, because we have a huge following, and the question always is, what is the nature of the following? Is it positive or negative?
Fantastic. All right, so Gilbert, you get the last bite. What is your one word or one phrase, one sentence you would give to leaders of Africa?
Leaders of Africa, you can only win if you learn to manage these three things. Managing the relationships you have with key stakeholders, both nationally and internationally. Managing the perception that you have globally and also nationally. Managing the trust that you have to create with these stakeholders. I believe that this is going to create massive capital, massive intangible capital for you to be able to achieve the objectives that you have. But there is a catch. For you to be able to win at these three things, you have to be authentic and you have to collaborate with the right people, namely ourselves, but also many other stakeholders in society, to get it right.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. This morning has been an exciting conversation, how to harness the power of public relations. It's our self-improvement segment. And I thank you to Gilbert Manirakiza, who is the founder and CEO of the Newmark Group, and Noel Nuchuga, public relations lecturer with GIJ Unimac.